And we're live with Joseph Atwill, author of Caesar's Messiah, the infamous book that was made into a documentary that described the the story behind the New Testament and the thesis that it was in fact created by the Roman propaganda department when Constantine decided to adopt Christianity as the imperial religion. I hope I've summed it up reasonably accurately.
I mean, Constantine wasn't the individual who organized the authorship of it, but he was certainly the one who promoted it and propelled it into history. Sorry, but the thing is that the books, the Gospels would have been written after the first century war, and would have probably been written around the year between 90 and 100. So.
You mean the New Testament would have been written
Yeah.
around? Yes, I remember reading that it was written between 30 to 70 years after the death of Jesus. Is that...
Well, I mean, it would have been written following the first century war between Romans and the messianic movement. That war concluded on Passover 73. And so following the war, the Flavians, who at that time had taken over the throne, that they had become the imperial family, they set about to, I think, the political purpose for Christianity was to simply create a pacified version of Judaism. They had fought, the war that the Flavians fought was just one in a series of wars that Rome fought against Judaism, and so they wanted a version of Judaism that was, would give to Caesar what is Caesar and would advocate the turning of the cheek. The Messianic movement, if you look at the literature in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's very militaristic.
May I stop you there, because there's so much information that I think my viewers might not be familiar with the war and maybe the Flavians, and I would really appreciate it if you could dumb it right down for us.
Sure.
So you mentioned a war.
Right, there was a war between Rome. I mean, the Roman Empire was a prison of nations, essentially, and one of the regions was Judea. Rome had taken control of the area of this region, and then had tried to control the religion of the Jews in various ways that was unacceptable to the Jews of Israel, or of Judea, as was known. And so there was a series of rebellions. The first ones were early in the first century. And then there was a major one that broke out in 66 CE. It was able to, repel Rome from the region. They were this militaristic messianic movement was able to defeat the Roman legion that was guarding the region. And they established their own nation state. They were printing coins, and Rome, of course, couldn't accept this kind of rebellion.
Was it the Maccabees? Is that what you're talking?
Well,
the Maccabean revolt.
That was like the Maccabees would have been they were a fundamental Jewish family that set up Eretz Israel. They are the ones who actually established what can be seen as the modern religious state of Israel. This was, like 160 BCE, so this was long before the war. But that family was deposed by the Herods, who were in alignment with the Roman Empire. In fact, they were a kind of tax collector for Rome, and so the Herods were able to, with the help of Rome, take advantage of interfamily squabbles that Hasmoneans were having, and so they ended up in control. The Herods attempted to legitimize their rule by by taking female wives from the Hasmonean lineage. So,
Right, but perhaps you could give us a bit of the background and maybe the timeline again. So there was a rebellion in 66 CE
yeah,
after the death of Jesus, but things were tense before that, and
yep, yeah. They
I
were
suppose
tense
really I need
because
to know
let me just give you the Roman Caesars had established the imperial cult. It began with speak. Elisa, I'm doing an interview right now. Can you? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so what happens is that Rome had created had reduced Judea to a province, and Rome, the Caesars had only one rule, which is that one religious requirement, which was you had to permit the worship of Caesar. And so they were interested in having the Temple of Jerusalem provide sacrifices for
the emperor.
The emperor as a god. And they attempted to put a statue of I think it was Caligula into the temple. Nero wanted to do the same thing. And so there was a rebellion against this. And though the precise details of the rebellion are argued about by scholars, the Roman historian Josephus recorded after the war the motivation of the people. And he said what really propelled the Jews to rebel was the messianic prophecies. He said the fact that they believed that someone from their race would eventually rule the world, that this was what inspired them to rebel against Rome. Now, the 66-73 rebellion, which is the one that is linked to Christianity, because, for example, it was when the Jerusalem was encircled and the temple was razed. These are prophecies that are found being purportedly made by Jesus in the Gospels. So he is looking to the war. It's interesting that most Christians and very few scholars are completely unaware of how the history of Jesus is completely mechanically wired into the Roman war. Jesus makes all of these prophecies concerning the coming war, but moreover, he's born in. He is crucified in 33 on Passover. Now, he is the Passover lamb of the Gospels. I mean, this is the fundamental symbolic framework of the Gospels. Jesus is a human Passover lamb, and he is basically the Passover lamb because he is the beginning of the new covenant. In the old covenant, you had the 40-year cycle wherein Moses had the original Passover, and then the Jews had the 40 years of wandering, after which they were able to take possession of Israel. This is the story of the creation of ancient Israel that you find in the Torah. In the story of Jesus, he is a Passover lamb. He's established as a human Passover lamb, but in a number of ways.
As human sacrifice.
Yeah, but specifically as a Passover lamb. I mean, in other words, you have instructions as to how to prepare the Passover lamb, and one of them is that you're not to break any of the bones of the animal. And this is why, when Jesus is on the cross, they do not break his bones. They actually, the authors make they go out of their way to make the assertion so that people will know that he is being set up as a new Passover lamb, and then they place hyssop, on him. They touch him with this cloth that has hyssop, and this is to typologically represent the first Passover, wherein hyssop was used to designate which houses would be passed over by the angel of death. So, they use this array of symbols from the first Passover just to make it absolutely certain that people recognize that Jesus is he is representing the new covenant. So the old covenant had a 40-year cycle, and after which then the Israelites were able to take possession of Israel. In the Gospels, they create a brand new 40-year cycle. And this is very clear because they actually, in Acts, they talk about what would amount to the Pentecost, right? They have 70 days after the fact. You have just as in the first cycle. I mean, these are details that probably, unless you're sort of into the technical aspects of Christianity, you wouldn't know. But just as a broad stroke, Jesus is the beginning of the new covenant. Right, he represents a break from the old covenant. He is establishing a new covenant, and he dies on Passover 33. The Roman Jewish War ends exactly 40 years to the day later, so you can see that this is artificial, obviously, and that was when Masada falls and Rome then takes possession of all of Judea. They are now they become basically the Israelites, in a sense, because they now have taken possession of the promised land. So and Jesus, he is referencing the war, in ways that are subtle and sort of have to be in a more technical kind of perspective, but just in very obvious ways too. I mean, he talks about there's going to be this terrible thing in the future, and at that time Jerusalem will be encircled with a wall. Well, that's obviously an event which actually happened 40 years later during the Roman Jewish War. And then famously, Jesus also talks about the destruction of the temple. It'll be raised, not one stone atop another. I mean, this actually happens in the coming war that Jesus is predicting. So Jesus makes predictions about the coming war, and then you have this miraculous 40-year, typologic reenactment of the first covenant, which had the 40-year cycle between the Passover lamb and the taking possession of Israel. So, I mean, these things are, when you look at them, people sometimes would say it's miraculous. Jesus could see into the future. But a more natural, sort of easy to understand explanation is just the authors are writing after the fact and they're back calculating things. So they just invent the date of Jesus's death based upon when the Rome took possession of Israel, and then just back calculate it 40 years and then set up their human Passover lamb to begin the cycle of the new covenant. They were creating a religion that was as I said, had a political purpose, which was simply to pacify, to be a religion that could more easily accept being part of the Roman Empire.
Yes, and you're saying this religion was created by the Flavians.
Yeah.
During the Flavian dynasty.
Well, they produced the literature, I think. In other words, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Book of Revelation, Acts. This literature would have been produced during the period of time when the Flavians were Caesars, because the literature is very much about their military, achievements. So it's you get to see their military achievements represented as divine act. Jesus predicts them, 40 years before they happen.
And in the documentary, you say that the Romans it was part of their policy to do this sort of thing. They had a propaganda department that would basically pump all this stuff out. Did I understand right?
Well, I mean, I don't think they had a propaganda department per se, but I think the Imperial cult was a propaganda department in and of itself. In other words, the Roman Caesars were using religion and using the idea of themselves being divine as part of their of the capacity of the ability to get people to obey them. And in fact, the what's called the divine right of kings, in fact, stems right from the Flavians' creation of Christianity, because this was, they were making the case late when Christianity became the state religion that we're here ruling because God ordained us to be here, and we are Christians, and therefore you should be in obeyance. I mean, this Christianity was set up by Constantine as part of the feudal system, which you have to remember is a slave system. When Constantine established the process to make Christianity the state religion, it took like 75 years or something. So it wasn't just a single emperor; it was a series of edicts. But when Constantine began the process by giving Christianity the capacity to use the Roman military to establish itself, he was doing so as part of the establishment of the feudal system, because among the edicts that he was creating at that time, he was also creating edicts that were relating to the establishment of Christianity. He was also creating edicts that were establishing the feudal system. What do
you mean by feudal system? A slave system? But the slave system existed a long time ago, didn't it?
Surely, but the feudal system was just the variation that Constantine created. He for example, I'll just give you an example of what he was doing. There was a class of Roman citizens called the colonites, where the word colonize come from, and they could create ownership in land by taking wild land and cultivating it, and after a certain amount of time they would actually have ownership of it and have rights. All of this disappeared under Constantine. The land would revert to the state. The state would own the land. The individuals who had children on the land the state could take them. You had to have the same occupation as your father, unless the state authorized otherwise. And you had to take oaths to the particular liege lord who had control over the region you were born in. So this was all new, and it was, obviously slavery was always part of the Roman Empire, but in the establishing of what we refer to as the feudal system, it was just a more draconian, more focused kind of system, and much of what had been seen as republic rights of Roman citizens disappeared during this time. And my point is that Christianity was simply one of the edicts that brought about what becomes known as the feudal system. If you look at paintings of the feudal system from the Middle Ages, you'll see that the hierarchy is simply a single, stock of church officials and Roman political magistrates. So you have the Pope at the top, and then the Emperor, and then the cardinals, and then the dukes, and you just go on down till you get to the serf, who is basically an animal. So there was no real, I think at the political level, there was no real distinction between the church and the political class. They were all part of the same thing. And just as an example, the title Pontiff Maximus, which it means, which was the original term for the Pope. I mean, this was a title that was given to Caesar. This was what he was known as when he officiated as the head of the Roman College of Priests. So Pontiff Maximus was a title of Caesar, which then is applied to the popes going forward. But I think what really happens here is just they they changed the title from Caesar to Pontiff Maximus because the political class wanted to create the impression of religion as the basis for their authority, because they felt this would be, more effective at mind control.
Wasn't that the case anyway? I mean, they had the old Roman religion. I guess they assumed that they were blessed by Jupiter
Yeah,
before they were, blessed by Jesus.
yeah. I mean, the the propaganda technique is, I mean, I think probably as old as civilization. I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
it's
the Aeneid was
yeah,
an act of Roman propaganda, wasn't it?
yeah,
By
yeah.
Virgil.
I would absolutely say so. And so it's just Christianity was just another iteration of the propaganda that the ruling class used to keep the subjects mind controlled and obedient.
Indeed, but there must have been. I mean, the Roman religion must have been failing for Constantine to want to
Well, it's
change it.
interesting, but if you look at that period and how Constantine becomes Caesar, there was a civil war which basically had that as its subject. That one group wanted to maintain the old Roman religions, and Constantine and his forces wanted to move into this other form of religion, wherein the Christianity was would become the sole religion in Rome. Um, I think that Flavius Constantine was related to the original Flavians. I suspect he was probably he was just developing his own family's cult, and and that was why he maintained Christianity, as kind of something that he was involved with. Um, he aligned his. If you look at the Arch of
But what dynasty
Constantine,
was Constantine? Just to be
yeah,
clear about the dynasties, it was the Julian dynasty first, Julius
yeah,
Caesar,
yeah, the
etc.,
Julio,
and
the
then the
Julio,
Flavians,
right.
and if you could just give us a timeline of this to make
Well,
it
you have
clearer.
you have so you have the Julio Claudians, these are the most famous Caesars, right? And
Yes.
then you have Nero, and when he dies, there is chaos. There's a couple more Julio Claudians who come forward. They only last a few days. It's chaos in Rome. The Flavians, who were military, they were military family. Their perspective was, and how they describe it, is that the Julio Claudians had become weak and crazy. You think of Nero and Caligula, and so what Rome needs, what the empire needs, is the strict hand of someone who is from a more austere military background. So they came to Rome. Vespasian left Judea, where he was fighting the civil war, and he went to Rome, and then they deposed the Julio Claudian emperor, and Vespasian became Caesar.
And
Um,
Vespasian was
the,
a Flavian, the
that's right. He was the founder of the Flavian dynasty. There were only three of them. There was Vespasian, then his son Titus, and then his other son Domitian, who took over after Titus died, after a brief 2-year reign as Caesar.
and Pliny
Ran-
worked for Vespasian.
That's correct. Yeah, they
That's
worked together. In fact, I would suspect very much that Pliny the Elder was one of the people who were involved in the writing of the Gospels.
Oh.
I think you can actually identify the authors of it by the kind of literature, and then also the perspective of the authors. I think
Was
if
it
you look
written
at,
in Latin?
pardon me,
Was it written in Latin?
no,
It was
no, it
in
would have been
Vulgate Greek, wasn't
it would
it?
have been written in Greek.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was written in Greek, which, I mean, all of the well, I mean, the patrician class could easily speak Greek, of course, and so. And so this was, and I think that was also more the lingua franca. They didn't really write the Gospels as a political act. It wasn't written to convert zealots. That would have been far-fetched. It was mainly, I think, as a political force. They thought that they could contain the messianic, excuse me, the missionary activities of the messianic movement. Um, Josephus, the Flavian historian, talks about the fact that they were concerned that this messianic movement would spread throughout the empire, and then they would have a rebellion all over the place. So I think Christianity was simply just a way of, as they created it, was just a way to slow down the missionary activity by creating an alternative Judaism, which had a Messiah who was someone who could get along with the Roman Empire. I mean, Jesus obviously was not in rebellion against the Roman Empire. I mean, he's advocating giving to Caesar what is Caesar's and other things. So he's, and of course this is preposterous, from a historical perspective, because the king of the Jews, the anointed king of the Jews, this is a title that comes from David, who was a warrior, right? I mean, this is not someone who is, going to accept Roman colonialization. And so it is, suspicious that this character, Jesus Christ, comes into history at this exact moment. And, so this is, just part of sort of the things I think people should be honestly suspicious about when they consider Christianity, is that the character Jesus Christ isn't really someone that you can make sense of from the normal kind of messianic traditions, which I think are easy. If you want to see what they're like, simply read the literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is, I think, legitimate.
What do the Dead Sea Scrolls say? I've never really been clear about that. They
just have a very militaristic Messiah. They talk about a messianic individual, but they talk about they're a very militarized cult. In fact, this was one of the very first things that made me curious about all this, is I was reading the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I could see how militaristic they were, and how this movement was, obviously looking to the religion as a inspiration for defeating the Romans and reestablishing, a religious kingdom of Israel. And I couldn't quite make any sense out of how this messianic movement could have coexisted with Jesus's group. I mean, it just seemed impossible to me, because the
Jews were very disappointed with Jesus, weren't they? I mean, they expected a man on a stallion, and he came in with a donkey.
Yeah.
I mean,
these are stories from the Gospels, but the fact is that if there was a messianic movement, as is portrayed in the Gospels, the followers of Jesus and the people who are interested in his teachings, I mean, they would have been, I would suspect, if there was logic to history, they would have been in war with the other messianic movement that was very militaristic. So I think that it was, it's far more likely in my mind that the stories of Jesus are fictional and were just written after the fact, after the Jewish War, to create a historical basis for a new religion, a different kind of Judaism.
Mm-hmm. And apparently there is no record of any Jesus amongst the Jews. Or maybe they were excised, but they were saying that there's no we don't know of any Jesus. There's some, they dug up something and said, oh, it might be him, but his apostles are not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they've got some other different name. And by the way, he wasn't crucified; he was stoned to death for his blasphemy of saying his papa was God. I think that's their story.
Yeah, I mean, there's no contemporary description of Jesus. No one during his lifetime was writing about him, or at least not that we can, determine through the
only Josephus, and he was considered suspect because he worked for the Flavians. Right?
Well, Josephus wasn't. He was born after the purported death of Jesus, so he wasn't alive during the Jesus's ministry.
So
he
he
did
would
record.
know anyway. He could only have
Well,
relied on reports that.
right, of course. I
Mm,
mean, he was writing, Josephus wrote his history at the same time the Gospels are being written, in fact, in the same location. So um, he would have known about the character Jesus Christ. I think in fact, his histories are used as the basis for the Gospels. So he would have had intimate knowledge if he was a real person. But I doubt if Josephus was a real individual. I think that is a nom de plume. I mean, it's he certainly has an exotic history. They claim that he was a member of all three of the Jewish sects. That he was a child prodigy. That he was from the Hasmonean family, and then amazingly that he was a general of the rebellion of the troops of Galilee. He is captured by the Romans, by the Flavians, at which point he has a divine, uh, or insertion of an idea, a revelation,
mm-hmm.
in which that he he sees that the old covenant is over, and that there is a new covenant now between the Romans and God. He goes to Vespasian and he says, this is going to happen, and in fact, you're going to become Caesar. And this is a prophecy that Josephus is making long before the time when Vespasian becomes Caesar. And in fact, um, uh, you know, um, it's just, I think this is just kind of comedy that the
Mm.
Flavians are having with prophecy. But in any case, these events could not have happened, and so I think that the most likely thing is that they just as they created Jesus, they also created the historian that recorded the events that Jesus prophesied. So,
What did you
uh,
say couldn't have happened? I'm not clear about that.
well, the uh, Josephus would not have been able to look into the future.
No,
so,
no. I
so,
suppose,
uh,
but
so,
we can
so
all
there
make predictions.
we all can. This was a particularly uh, hard to believe prediction because he was thinking there would be the end of the Julio Claudians and a precise Roman general would then become Caesar. So this is a very, I think this would be as far fetched as, for example, Jesus' ability to see into the future. So whenever I look at a prophecy that comes true, the first thing that comes to me is that this is written after the event occurs that was prophesied, because it's very easy
The
to have
benefit of hindsight, eh?
yeah, that's right. That with hindsight, prophecies are easy, and so this is what I think is the most natural explanation, is that Josephus was he was just writing about things when he claims to have written about or it's had the understanding that Vespasian becomes Caesar. This was literature that was written after the fact, and he's just creating a fictional prophecy to give a kind of aura of religion around the Flavians becoming seizing the throne. Um, so it's the same technique that then was used with the character Jesus Christ, who then made all the predictions about the war,
Right.
which all came to pass.
Do we have any historical evidence that the Roman religion was failing?
No, I would go the other way. I think the well, it depends what you mean by Roman religion.
Well,
The
well,
the the,
I
imper, the imperial cult was in full flower at this time, and I would say actually that if you understand the literature of of Christianity, of the Gospels, you can see that really when what Jesus is actually saying is that there is someone who's going to come in 40 years who will be what he refers to as the Son of Man. Jesus doesn't actually, say he's the individual who's going to, have all of this authority and power and bring all of these terrible things that he sees to pass. He just refers to someone in the third person called the Son of Man, and I think that if you read Caesar's Messiah, you'll see that what you have is a typological prediction with this literature, with the Gospels, that foresees the Son of Man's coming, and it identifies the Son of Man. It points out that the Son of Man is in fact the Roman Caesar. So really what you have with Christianity is just a kind of, it's a Jewish prophetic version of the imperial cult. It's really not outside of the imperial cult that was taking place. It just changed the names of some of the individuals that you're worshiping. But the fact is, it really comes down to it that the Son of Man that Jesus is predicting is the Caesar. And as another example of this, when Constantine died, he got the relics, he got icons of the 12 apostles. I don't know how he found them all, but he did. And then he arranged them around his burial chamber, his crypt. So he was making a clear representation as to, the fact he was Jesus Christ. I mean, this was the position, I think, of or perhaps not Jesus Christ, but he was the Son of Man that Christianity worships, you see. I mean, this is really kind of, again, this is hard to understand, but it is, it falls right out of the analysis when you understand the typology of the gospel. That.
What do you mean by typology?
Well, typology it's a genre of literature which is based upon other stories. It's used in religious sense in the Torah, for example. So that you can understand that one prophet his life is being repeated in the subsequent person's life, and that the purpose of this is to show that God's hand is at work. In other words, that there is so much similarity between these individuals that this is an example of God's hand at work.
Sort of history repeating itself, kind of.
Exactly. And let me just give you this is a critical small piece of typology which so few Christians know about, and it just demonstrates completely that the character Jesus Christ is fictional. If you look at the story of Jesus's pre-ministry, you find in Matthew, you have the story of Joseph, who has dreams and then decides he will leave Judea. He goes to Egypt. That's at 2:13. And then you have Herod, the famous story of Herod massacring the boys. When they're in Egypt, a divine individual appears to the family and he says, "They are dead which sought the young child's life, so they can return." They go back from Egypt to Israel. Jesus has his baptism. Then he goes into the wilderness for 40 days, and he has these temptations that Satan attempts to tempt him, and you have statements that in the wilderness, you have the temptation, tempted by bread, and then another experience with Satan in which Jesus says, "Do not tempt God." And then finally, the temptation in which Jesus tells Satan to worship only God. Okay, so that is, these are highlights of the pre-ministry of Jesus, and they're all typology derived from the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, you have the story of Joseph, who goes from Judea to Egypt. Pharaoh massacres the boys. Then a divine person intercedes and states that all the men are dead which sought the life. It's a quote that is then reused by Matthew. You have the journey back from Egypt to Israel. Now you have the passing through water, just as Jesus has his baptism. You have this passing through water. Now, the Jews go into the wilderness for 40 years, whereas Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days. Mm-hmm. But it's typology. It's not verbatimism. You're just exchanging enough information between the stories so an alert reader will understand the connection.
I see a few recurring themes and numbers.
Recurring theme. But then the quotes that that Jesus gives to Satan are verbatim. He takes them right from, the author takes them right from Exodus. The tempted by bread, do not tempt God, worship only God. These are all statements by Moses to the Israelites. But the author uses them so that you have this long sequence which occurs in order in both stories. You know, the Joseph going, from Judea to Egypt, the massacre of the boys, the divine person saying all the men are dead, the passing through water, and then into the wilderness. So what the author of Matthew has done is taken all these stories from Exodus, these passages, and has woven them into a story of a character who's going to repeat the role of Moses as the savior of Israel. Basically, he will be the new head of the Israelites, and so, but you can see that. People have written novels about Jesus's life, in Egypt, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But this is preposterous because if you look at where the story in Matthew originates, it isn't from a historical individual. It's from the author just taking a story out of the Old Testament to use in his narrative to create typologic linkage. I could give an example of, this stuff occurs in where the authors of the Gospels are getting this genre is actually from Jewish literature, Hebraic literature, which I won't give examples because it takes a while to do, but that's where that particular genre. So typology typology is not history. It can't be by definition. You're using a prior story to create another story. So it is a fictional genre. And that's why when you see the story of Jesus going from Judea to Egypt and Joseph being his father, these names are not real. These locations and these actions are not real. They're simply being lifted from the stories in the Torah. These elements, the names of individuals, the locations, the actions, they're just being lifted from this in sequence, so they're easy to understand where they're coming from if you know what you're looking for. And it has a purpose. You see, the purpose is to show that Jesus is linked to Moses. You see, his life has this reoccurring typologic themes, right? And these aren't occurring, in terms of the authors of the literature accidentally. They're giving the impression that Jesus was basically his life was created in relationship to prior Hebraic prophets.
Do you think?
And then of course, yeah.
But please carry on. I'll ask my question
Well,
a
I
bit
was just
later.
going to say that. Okay, so that's that one little example. But then, it's like the miracle of the loaves and fishes. This is just repeating a story from an event in the life of the prophet Elijah. When Jesus goes up the hill to have the transubstantiation, and he comes down with ash on his face. This is just repeating Moses's experience where he goes up and gets the Ten Commandments and comes back with ash on his face. So they take these elements from the story of Moses and just from Jewish literature in general, and reweave them into stories about this character Jesus Christ. The central image of the Gospels is that Jesus is a human Passover lamb. He is the Passover lamb of the new covenant.
Well,
Right.
Thank you for making that point. But it seems to
Yeah.
me that there's a kind of a division here. In that Jews, they worship the God of Israel, and Gentiles, they worship a Jew. It's like, know your place, Gentiles. They're these Jews worshipping the God of creation, and they're these Gentiles worshipping a Jew.
Well, it's it's hard to understand exactly the political motivation of the authors of the Gospels.
Well, it seems a little incoherent because, obviously
No,
they're
it's not
kind of
incoherent.
lowering themselves
It's
into.
it's unfortunately completely coherent. It's just that it's the the real problem that or one of the real problems is a problem of vanity. If you drive around Rome, what you'll see are lots of edifices to the divine Caesars. I mean, the Colosseum. I mean, these things are all dedicated to the divine Caesars. The imperial cult was very powerful, and so the problem that the Romans had with the Jews is they wouldn't worship Caesar. Basic problem, and so the literature of the Gospels simply states at the end that Jesus sees someone who's going to have great power, more powerful than him, in fact. He just refers to him as the Son of Man. The identity is left for the reader to guess at. I mean, is it Jesus coming back or who? In fact, this is just a cryptic way of creating vanity, legacy for the Caesars, so that rather than accepting the fact that the Jews wouldn't worship him, they simply created a religion that worships Caesar without the people who are the subjects of the religion knowing it. So that is what is the actually going on in Christianity. So it's the Son of Man that Jesus foresees actually can be identified.
And you're saying it's Constantine?
No, it's Titus Flavius. Constantine is hundreds of years after the Flavians. I mean, he is his name is Flavius Constantine, and there are reasons to believe that he is a family member, but they don't have the precise lineages of the Caesars, so no one can know with certainty.
But isn't it the case that the Romans began as the people who hated kings, and then they ended up as people who worshipped their emperors. So, obviously something happened between them being a republic and them being an empire.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, it's just the sad, advent of vanity of the rulers who gave up the republican principles and turned it into a dictatorship, and then finally into a slave camp with the feudal system. So.
But they were worshipping the emperors, long before Jesus turned up, weren't they? I mean, they started worshipping. I think it was Augustus when he died.
Well,
He was...
the first deified Caesar was Julius. He was deified a few years after his death. Augustine was also deified. So. The idea of deifying Caesar would occur after his death, typically, but in fact, like Domitian, Titus's brother, he wanted to be referred to as God, and so did
I think
Nero.
Nero said he wanted to be worshipped while he was still alive.
Nero wanted there, so they became living gods. But this was, later on at the beginning of the imperial cult, they would have it's posthumous, but then this changes and it becomes. Something that Caesar wants the title of God. But this is just propaganda. I mean, it's just a way to create a stature for the ruler.
Yes, but because according to Virgil in the Aeneid, Julius Caesar was meant to be the semi-divine son of Aphrodite. That's the story, according.
Yeah. I mean, this is like an old trick. As I'm sure you know, I mean, when the Ptolemies took over, Egypt, they became raw. Mm-hmm. So the idea of taking on the aspect of God as a way of helping with, ruling people is, I mean,
the Japanese emperor is supposedly divine.
Yep. So it's an old trick, and Christianity is just another version of it. The Son of Man that Jesus predicts, who has no clear identity, is in fact, when you understand the typology, And see, in Caesar's Messiah, the evidence that I present is of a completely different quality. I mean, there's lots of different theories about Christianity and Jesus and the origins, and I mean, there's just almost as many as there are Christians. But I have a different quality of evidence. I mean, I just lay two texts side by side, and I say, look, there are obvious parallels. And in many cases, they are not even symbolic. They are the same thing, like Jesus predicts Jerusalem will be encircled with a wall, and this event actually happens during the war. So when you actually just take these texts and lay them side by side, you can see that there is dependency, that the story of Jesus' adult ministry was created out of the story of the Flavian military conquest in the exact same way and using the exact same system of typology that I gave earlier. If you look at the names, locations, concepts that are used to create, going back in time to Moses to create the pre-ministry of Jesus, ministry uses the exact same system of sequence, names, locations, and concepts. Going forward, it links Jesus 40 years into the future to the war between Rome and the Jews. So this evidence is, I mean, it's archaeologic. It doesn't really even need a whole lot of explanation. All you need to do is just have the events aligned side by side, and you can see that the thing that was really completely overlooked by Christian scholarship is the power of sequence. No one had ever really looked at the ministry of Jesus and asked the question, is there any meaning to the sequence of events? I mean, people get caught up in the story of Jesus as a historical narrative, or as a narrative with beautiful spiritual statements in it. But the idea that the sequence could have a meaning in the same way that the sequence has a tremendous meaning in the typology I read going back in time to Moses, that had never been looked at by anyone. And it's just a shocking oversight, because sequence is so important in the typology I showed between Jesus and Moses. I mean, you couldn't even see the typology if it wasn't for the sequence. The sequence arranges it so that a human mind can organize it easily and recognize that one story is dependent on the other. Anyway, no one had ever looked at the sequence having any meaning. And unfortunately, when you do apply that methodology, the answer becomes vivid almost immediately, that the ministry of Jesus, the adult ministry, was created out of the Flavian military campaign.
Right. What gave you this idea? What was your
How did I come
eureka
across?
moment
Yeah, I
when you
mean,
thought,
it's
aha?
I was just curious about Christianity. I was raised Christian. I went to a St. Mary's Military Academy in Tokyo when I was a kid, and so I was given the Gospels and the New Testament, daily as an aspect of study. And so I think I had just kind of a built-in curiosity about them. And then I discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and as I said, I was amazed that this group was militaristic.
And basically, what did the Dead Sea Scrolls say? That our Messiah will come and he'll kick
Well, the Dead Sea
ass,
Scrolls
something
you
like
can't,
that.
I
Was
don't
it?
think it wouldn't do them justice to try to, reduce them down. But in general, the movement is militaristic. And in general, the literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls is the literature of the messianic movement of Palestine that rebelled against Rome. And
Were they
so
the Essenes? Were they
I'm sorry?
written?
No, the Essenes are they're a group that Josephus talks about. They were involved in the Roman War, so they weren't pacifistic. But nothing is really known about them, and there's just a few lines. I mean, there's just a very few lines. I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls are, there is hundreds of documents, and so they give a really good understanding of what literature would have been meaningful to the movement that rebelled. Because to me, the war is the dividing line. That's the critical dividing line. It's the group that rebelled against Rome and the Jews that did not. And the group that rebelled against Rome, they had a very warlike understanding of the Torah, of the Jewish scripture. So, this was the problem that Rome was facing. Now, people say, well, why would they bother creating the Gospels? What was the political point if they'd already defeated the Jews? They'd destroyed them, Well, in fact, this did not happen. They had subdued them, but they knew perfectly well by, say, the year 100 that there was going to be another rebellion. 113, 115, there was what's called the Kittos Rebellion, another messianic rebellion. At that time, the Jews gained control of the island of Cyprus and executed 250,000 Gentiles. Okay, so it shows you the degree of ferocity. Mm-hmm. They took over Egypt for a period of time. There's actually a letter that was discovered of a Roman magistrate trying to flee down the Nile to get away from the Jewish military forces. And then 15 years later, 133, you had the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and this was an absolute bloodbath. No one has even an idea about numbers, but there were so many people killed, so many Romans killed, that when the military general came back to Rome, he didn't go through the normal celebration process because so many parents in Rome had lost sons during the battle. So these were really existential, wars that went on between the Romans and the Jews, and they went on long after the 66 and 73. The Flavians concocted the idea of the Gospels with the idea of trying to prevent the wars that then took place. They weren't able to stop them.
Mm-hmm. So here's me thinking that Constantine wanted to change, wanted to breathe new life into the failing imperial religion because it was failing, and you're saying it wasn't failing as far as you knew?
I don't think anyone knows it was failing or not. I mean, how would they make that decision?
I read this Wikipedia.
Let me just explain. The reason they would say that is because Christianity was emerging, but that could have been not because the other old Roman religions were failing. It was because there were parts of the Roman imperial force that was promoting Christianity. It wasn't. In other words, they transitioned at some point. A certain fraction of them did. They decided that Christianity would be a better religion to control the masses than the imperial cult which worshipped Caesars. So they transitioned, at least the group that was around Constantine.
They didn't worship the Roman pantheon. I was thinking of Jupiter and Hera and.
No, they did. Constantine was, he worshipped Sol Invictus. So he was obviously, he wasn't, Christian per se. I mean, Claire, you have to remember the patrician class is very cynical about religion. I mean, they are setting themselves up as human gods. So I would think it's better to look at this process of religion in ancient Rome as simply a process of propaganda. Mm-hmm. By the imperial families rather than anything to do with like a legitimate religion. I mean, I just don't think that the imperial cult was ever by the groups that were creating, but it was ever seen as a serious religion. It was always understood as simply propaganda.
Right. So I was thinking of the cult of the Vestal Virgin.
Well,
do you know anything of that?
No, I mean. I'm aware of it. I mean, the thing is that there was, for example, Mithras, which was very popular. Um, I think, I mean, I'm just, my opinion is that the imperial class was very cynical, and were I think you can really see it when you look at the origins of Christianity and who are the first Christians. The imperial family were the first Christians: Flavia, Domitilla, Clement, Priscillus. I mean, Neros and Aquila. These were all Flavian
Women,
family members.
women.
The
Did you say
individuals
women?
that are,
They were
pardon me?
women. These names are the names of
These are the names of the first recorded Christians. The
Roman
early
noble
ones.
women.
Pardon me?
They were Roman noble women who
And men.
and men.
Yeah, but they were
Okay.
they were they were Roman. They were members of the Flavian family. Is what they were. I mean, if you go to the catacombs in Rome, the earliest Christian catacomb is Flavia Domitilla's, and she is either Titus's sister or niece. No one's sure, but she's a member of the imperial family, and so you would say, well, why would the imperial family be, promoting a strange messianic Jewish religion? They just had this big war. Um, well, it's because they aren't really promoting religion; they're using propaganda. And this is mind control. This is what when people think about just the imperial cult. Um, it's not something that the individuals who are worshipped or who are promoting the worship, I mean, that they don't take this stuff seriously, obviously.
Well, they couldn't because the people would know that the Roman emperor in question was mortal, and that was just part of the imperial culture to assume that he's now a god after he's dead, and so I guess that would be a problem of belief. But I was really thinking of the cult of the Vestal Virgin because I happen to remember reading a Wikipedia entry on that, and it was saying basically that at the beginning only aristocratic Roman women could join, and after they served their time, they would be married, so they didn't have to be a virgin for the rest of their lives, and they would become a kind of status symbol for Roman men to marry a Vestal Virgin, and then as time progressed, they just couldn't find any Roman women, Roman noble women prepared to do it, and then they had to look for talent amongst the plebeians, and then eventually they couldn't even find any virgins. so,
Yeah.
I thought, well, that would be a sign of the Roman religion declining, in rather the same way that Christianity is
I
declining now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not an incoherent position, but I don't think it really speaks to the sincerity of those who are promoting the religion. In other words, the Roman Caesars were augurs. They were involved in prophecies. They would like read entrails and things and give predictions. I mean, but this is not something they would take seriously. This was just being done to create the idea that they are connected to some sort of divine power. And the Vestal Virgins and their ability to predict. I believe they had prediction powers. I mean, maybe the population took it seriously, but I can't. I mean, just based on what I know from the creation of Christianity, I would say that the patrician class would not have taken it seriously. They were interested in propaganda. They were interested in control. Religion was just a very important part of control, and so they would shape it to whatever they thought it would be the best tool for control. I mean, the imperial
Yes.
cult worked for a while, and then they replaced that with Christianity when they went draconian and decided to end all of the republic liberties and create just this feudal system,
Yes.
slave state.
Yes, I mean, Stoicism seemed to be what the Roman political classes, the Roman nobility relied on.
Yeah,
And
that's
it was
right.
kind of a hopeless thing, we're all going to, be made to commit suicide by the emperor who wants our property, and we must, surrender ourselves with good grace and, without
Well,
too.
I think that Stoicism was also simply propaganda. I mean, if you look at Seneca, and then he was this proponent of, if you would just accept the place you are in the world, this is where you'll be happy. It doesn't matter, if you're rich, if you're poor, if you just accept what you have, then you will reach the highest level of satisfaction with life. But you have to remember, he had 10,000 slaves, right? It, it's a very convenient philosophy or religion for someone who is the owner of slaves.
Yes.
And it would be very, in my opinion, deleterious to the interests of the slaves to believe in this nonsense. So I think Stoicism is a good example of just, it's sophistry, Claire. I mean, it's like, it's a very clever argument that they're making, but it is ultimately just being done for an ulterior purpose, which is the same case with the creation of Christianity.
Well,
I mean,
Stoicism didn't actually solve any problems because it was just saying, you're gonna die. You better, just accept it calmly because it wouldn't be consistent with your aristocratic, dignity to complain too much. So,
sure.
so that was the extent that Stoicism served the Roman aristocracy, and
Well,
it
I
didn't,
think I,
it
I
didn't
think it
help
was really
things.
my position on that is that the aristocracy had they used it as a kind of sophistry, and it was really put into motion because it's such a preposterous philosophy at this time in history. It was just put into motion to create ideas to um, have obedience be something that was seen as virtuous. It's like if you look at the Apostle Paul talking about how slaves need to obey magistrates, right? God put you there for a reason, and God put the magistrate there for a reason. Is this a legitimate religious philosophy? Well, no, it's not. It's just an aspect of control,
Of
and
hierarchy.
yeah,
Yeah, I
of
mean, you know
hierarchy, and
your
that's
place,
so.
slave, and
Yeah,
the
know your
magistrate is
place,
above
and
you.
and but also, but remember, but the idea that God put you in your place, that you're not there because of the physical force of the ruler, you're there because this is how you worship God. Um, this then becomes the divine right of kings, which is the most ludicrous philosophy one can imagine, but it was actually promoted seriously, in the Middle Ages because the kings wanted people to see themselves as having a divine basis for their authority.
Well, I suppose that would be a kind of idea of regulating the morals of the emperor. I don't know if you're aware of the mandate of heaven. Are you?
No, the mandate of heaven. I didn't know heaven gave a mandate. Sorry.
Well, okay, you might say it's a legal fiction created by the Chinese, based on the idea that every Chinese emperor would be presumed to have the mandate of heaven, and and would
Well, I
have
mean,
it
there.
until and unless the sort of terrible things like pestilence and invasion and rebellion and natural disaster, when it would be presumed that the mandate of heaven was being withdrawn because the emperor of China had misgoverned his realm. So
Yeah, I mean, it's a childlike way of
of
believing in the
explaining
world.
things, I mean,
Yeah, of
it would
explaining
be.
things, right? And but it's also it's a the creation of this stuff is with the idea of control.
Of course,
If
but
you
I mean that's a
and
whole thing. We
Yeah.
kind of need to be controlled. That's why we have laws, right?
Well, I,
That
I mean, of course, and it's just a question of degree and of the difference between, is the authority something which many people participate in the creation of, or is it residing in just one or two individuals? So, um, it's if you're going to have a Caesar, you're also going to have propaganda, and um, so it's just the nature of our history is that. There is always this propaganda, and the public is never told it's propaganda. Propaganda doesn't work if uh, people understand that it's just being done to confuse them. Um, so there has to be a plausible story to surrounding the propaganda so that people will swallow it. And it's just this is what Christianity is.
so did when you wrote your book, were you already atheist?
No, I was never really an atheist. The problem is, it's way too complicated to, I think, be resolved. I can't tell. You have so many things which seem in the structure of the universe that seem to be a kind of design. On the other hand, you can also make the case that, well, if there is infinity, that these things could eventually have somehow accidentally occurred. Who knows? I don't know, and I don't really think that the question. I mean, I know this may seem strange, but I don't think the question is particularly relevant because it's not one that can be answered.
Well, I
So
think we simply make a choice, don't we? I mean,
yeah,
it's
you,
50-50, so we
yeah,
either choose to not believe and disobey God's laws, or we choose to believe in God because we think obeying His laws makes sense and would make the world
yeah.
a better place. And
Well, I
and, and
mean,
once we commit ourselves, then we will fall, we will
yeah, I wouldn't,
incline
I wouldn't
towards
express it.
belief.
I wouldn't express it like that because the idea of God's laws. I mean, this is a. Are there laws from God? This is
Well,
sort
the
of a.
Jews are supposed to believe in all that
They
sort of
they
thing.
that's right. Religious Jews believe it, and so do religious Christians and religious Muslims. And I don't think that this can be disproved. I certainly wouldn't be able to, but I don't have clarity as to the fact that they are in fact divine or come from kind of a single originator of the universe. So I'm afraid these questions can't be answered honestly. I think it's easy, like you say, to just sort of make a choice not based on clarity of mind, but just on how it fits into your heart. And I think that's nothing. I mean, I don't have any issue with someone conducting their life in that way. I mean, it's sort of how I conduct my life. It's just you. But I don't think honestly that we have the capacity to answer such questions. And so
Well,
um,
it's a kind of casting vote. I mean, if something's 50-50,
yeah,
it's like, well, the glass is filled halfway up. It's up to you to decide if it's half full or half empty. You know,
yeah, yeah, of course. And you just do the best you can. And there's but in any case, in my opinion, and again, this is just coming from me, is just we don't have enough. There isn't the capacity to answer those questions. It's sort of like the question of was there a historical Jesus? Um, I mean, I don't even think that this is a meaningful question. I mean, I know this just infuriates people, but the fact is, it can never be answered. And in many ways, it's a semantical question because I mean, it's for example, the person who creates Donald Duck had a duck that someone owned who lived next to him was named Donald. So is Donald Duck a historical character or is he a fictional character that's been embellished? So this is a semantical issue in terms of history. What does that actually mean? Um, and so I always, when people ask me about the historical Jesus, I just say that isn't a question that's meaningful. It can never be answered. What a better question is, what is the literature that we have? I mean, what genre of literature are the Gospels? And I think it can be demonstrated that the Gospels are tip to stern typology. All of the stories in them are based on other stories. They're either stories from the Old Testament or they're stories from the war between the Romans and the Jews, but all of Jesus's ministry is woven from other stories, prior stories. So therefore, the Gospels are not a historical genre; they're a fictional genre, and that's the question that we can answer. But the historical Jesus question is not something that no one will ever be able to answer it. It's not
well, I
possible.
suppose if you're a Muslim and there are references to Jesus and Mary in the Quran, then you'll say, yeah, he did exist because it says so in the Quran, and you know,
Sure.
and I suppose you can maybe deduce the purpose of Jesus in that he was the one who allowed Gentiles to you know, gave Gentiles the connection, or began to give them the
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
connection
No,
to the
I've
God of
yeah,
Israel.
I've had quite a few exchanges with Islamic scholars, and um, honestly, I'm quite curious as to what their position will be concerning my book. Um, I don't really know enough about Islamic theology to sort of plug my work into it, but I have
Well,
get
I
people.
can tell you that the Quran actually says that Jesus didn't die on the cross; he only appeared to do so, and God lifted him directly to heaven. So he didn't die on the cross.
Well, there you go. so so
And
there you go. I mean,
but
yeah.
Mary was a virgin.
Okay. Well, I mean, these are interesting ideas. They're not something that can be falsified, but at the same time, I'm not sure how anyone would prove such things. It would go to, if you believe that the Quran is creating a literal and history that is divine and sacrosanct, then that would be the evidence of the of the fact that these statements were historical. Um, the author could have had another purpose for creating these stories, but I'm not, as I said, I really am not able, I've never done the work to try to plug my work into the Islam. I have had exchanges, though, many exchanges with Islamic scholars who've read my work. And I think eventually they may produce some critique of it relative to Islam. And I'll be very interested to read it once they provide that.
Yes, I mean, for what it's worth, it seems to me that the Quran is actually a very pragmatic um, bargain, really. I mean, it's saying we don't hate Jesus. Certainly, we don't hate Jesus like the Jews hate Jesus because of what they said about him in the Talmud about boiling in excrement for all eternity. We know the Jews hate Jesus,
Yeah.
and but Muslims don't. So I guess the Quran is saying hey Christians, come to Islam because we love Jesus and we accept that his mum was a virgin. So
Yeah.
don't
And
worry
again,
about it. And then the extra bit would be and we believe that Jesus didn't die, but he's still a prophet of God, and so you keep all the status of Jesus being, prophet of God, son of a virgin mother, and I think the whole idea of saying Jesus didn't die on the cross is to actually put Muslims on the Christians on the spot, because then they say but we still don't like it and we don't want to become Muslim, and I guess the Muslim can say, look, do you really want Jesus to have died on the cross, died horribly for your sins? There is no need for him to die as a sacrificial, as a piece of human sacrifice, just so you can be saved from your sins. You become Muslim and you'll still get to heaven. What's the problem? And I think, when you put that to a Christian, they have no answer other than to say, Muhammad's a pedo and we hate you. There is no answer to that. When you put it to the Christian, I mean, what can they say? Oh, but we want we want Jesus to have died horribly for our sins, because that's what we like to believe, and all this stuff about us loving Jesus. No, we don't really love Jesus. We want him to die for our sins, and that's the whole point of Christianity. And we believe in human sacrifice, even though Abraham, basically said we're not going to do this sort of thing anymore.
yeah, well, the symbolism, the foundational symbolism of Christianity, but is bizarre. I mean, the idea of the Son of God becoming a human sacrifice is, I mean, one
Absurd.
can argue that is sort of absurd. And then the idea that it's repeating typologically the first covenant. Well, why would you need to do that? I mean, it just seems strange. And so, it is not sort of an intellectually clear foundation. Christianity is the foundation of it. The literature, the Gospels are. The Christians don't really have a kind of relationship to the literature of kind of literary criticism. They simply accept the spirit of it. And of course, bear in mind that you can have different interpretations of the Quran. I mean, obviously there are different positions on the Quran and the different sects. So, I mean, it's these literatures can be interpreted in a number of ways, and so to me that just sort of suggests that the idea that they're divine is not clear, because it'd be fairly easy for God to create literature that would have much more clarity than the books that we have. But that's
Well,
just
the
my
thing is,
personal.
I mean, the New Testament isn't even from Jesus, let alone God. I mean, it's the most high level testimony, and it's no more than testimony of mortal men about some event about, well, obviously about the resurrection of Jesus from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I mean that's the main thing. It's their testimony that they met Jesus, and that he was resurrected. But it's not divine. I mean, even Christians can't say that the New Testament is divine. But obviously Jews believe the Torah to have been handed to Moses by God on Mount Sinai, and Muslims do believe that the Quran
Yeah, but
isn't
I would
directly
think
the
that I
word of
would
God
think
through
many
Muhammad.
Christians, I would think many Christians would say that it is the word of God. They would believe that about the Gospels. I mean, divine inspiration is sort of in the eye of the beholder, and I know Christians who have that position about the text, that it is literally very special because it was inspired by God, and so.
They must be very angry with you, Joe.
Well, that is true, I suppose, but it is the when you cross into faith, you're sort of out of the area that I really, as someone who's a literary critic, can add anything to. I mean, once you're in someone's faith, that you're just operating in a different universe of energies, and a literary critic is just trying to look at the text, and we have the position that it's from humans, right? That is our perspective, right? You wouldn't do a textual criticism of divinely inspired words, because it would be absurd. So when
Well, I
you
mean, the Quran would be, well, I mean, anyone reading the Quran would be kind of performing a kind of textual criticism of the Word of
it
God.
could be, yeah, but I mean, I know um, Islamic scholars that are very devout and do see that the word of the prophet is inspired, and so at that point you're just into the world of faith. It isn't, it's none of my business if that's someone's position about the text. That's fine. I just was curious about this the origin of the Gospels. It made the story they told made no sense to me historically. The character made no sense, and so that was kind of I brought skepticism to the criticism of the textual criticism. That was my position, and so then from there I was able to come to conclusions which were distinct from someone who would be a member of the church, a faithful follower. I mean, I just came to a completely different understanding of literature, um, and put it out there, and uh, hopes for the best. I
Yes,
mean,
I don't know if you saw this famous meme or cartoon, and it's Jesus saying to his apostles, "Now listen carefully. I don't want there to be four versions of this."
yeah, right, right. So, but when you're writing typology, it's the more versions, the better, because it's easier to hide. This kind of occulted the writing style that the authors of the gospel were engaging in. They like to have many books, because the more books, the better. The harder it is to see the typology. This is the strange thing. It's hard really to understand that they wanted the legacy for having created the Gospels, but they also wanted the religion to function politically, and so the literature is written, in a very occulted way, and I think they definitely knew that eventually someone would notice all this, but um, they certainly wrote it with the idea that an ordinary person would just see the beautiful story of Jesus out of the language, and have, if that person was questioned as to why would there four different stories, he wouldn't have an explanation. He would just say, well, there were four inspired people. You know.
Well, I mean, for what it's worth, I think the best stories are in the Old Testament anyway. So, I suppose I couldn't. I don't. Well, unless you actually believe, I don't suppose you'd get very excited about the stories in the New Testament. But I assume you haven't read the Quran. I'm a little curious about what you're going to say about that. I mean, whether you'll
No,
write a
no,
book about
I
that.
have read it.
You have.
I, I have read it, yes. In fact, I was just reading it the other day.
What do
But
you
I
think?
don't. Well, I mean, it's very complicated literature, and it would take a lifetime to really get. Well, it would take a long time to have the kind of sort of expertise in the language and the literature that I would like to have. But I am interested in it. Like you now at this time, people will say things about the Quran. And I feel that sometimes they misstate it. They misstate the actual passage. So whenever I hear a Western journalist talk about the Quran or about Muhammad, I always do check it to see what actually the text says, and so that's just a habit I have. But as I said, I really would like to have sort of an informed place to come from to put out criticism of the Quran, or even interpretations of it, or just accepting or negating. And it would just take quite a while. I'm really much more interested in in terms of like Caesar's Messiah, I'm really interested in what, the Islamic scholars have to say about it, because quite a few of them have read the book. And so we'll see going forward if any of them wants to write criticism of my book based on their, on their understanding of Quran. It'll be interesting.
Well, I suppose they'd be interested in your book because it's their position that the Gospels have been corrupted.
Yes,
So,
exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
and
And they're very curious from at least that's one of the things that they're interested in. But they're also interested in just sort of the relationship between the story of Jesus and the Roman Jewish War is not well known. It should be. Unfortunately, it's not. And I think that's something that a lot of the Islamic scholars I've communicated with are curious about, is what actually happened, and how does the Gospels, fit into this war. It's just not something that is often taught in universities. You're not very seldom are you taught that, this relationship. And so
I'm not clear
you
from the
know.
New Testament why the Pharisees were always being so mean to Jesus. I mean, it's not. I don't know the reason. Why were they being so mean to Jesus?
They were just being set up as the Jews in general are, particularly the kind of religious authorities, who would be involved with the authority of Judaism as a religion in opposition to colonialization by Rome. So because that is the case, that these individuals and the Jews in general, they actually, they use the expression these Jews or those Jews, they're put in generally in a negative light. And I think that this is to slow down the missionary activity. I mean, they did not want this religion to spread. And so the Messianic Jews are seen that, well, the Jews in general are seen as, they killed Jesus for heaven's sakes. There only a few of them were righteous, and those individuals seem to have a nice connection into the Roman Empire
But the
because
thing is, if it
they
is
were
true
following
that
Jesus.
if it is true that Jesus did say his papa was God, then it would be blasphemy, and according to Matthew, he was convicted of blasphemy by the Sanhedrin. That's a
Well,
story, isn't it? That he did say,
I mean, you can interpret it that way, but it's the trial is not it's the whole story is like just a stick character. There's not enough data to really make clear understandings of what the trial was about, what the charges were. I mean, Pontius Pilate wanted to release him, supposedly. Notice that the Romans are not guilty, but the Jews were the ones who actually convicted Jesus. They said, his blood will be on our hands and on our children's hands. I mean, this is ludicrous propaganda.
Well,
I mean,
perhaps they were so angry at his blasphemy.
Well, but isn't it a little, if you want to take this as history, it's, your prerogative. I would say that the idea of establishing a character, beloved Jesus Christ, and then having the Jews asking that his blood be on their hands and on their children's hands, this to me smacks of sophistry and of propaganda. It certainly worked as propaganda historically. So,
well, I mean, the point is that they are so against the idea that, Jesus could be the Son of God and, the whole story. Because, but that's what the Trinity is all about, isn't it? That Jesus is indeed God. And
right.
even to this day, Jews
certainly
aren't allowed to enter churches because they are places of abomination where idolatry
he
is
doesn't
practiced.
he doesn't really say he's God, but he has this relationship to God the Father. He is his son, but the Trinity is a typologic characterization. You have the God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit. These are the Flavian Caesars. On the Arch of Titus in Rome, you can actually see the expression Vespasian, God the Father, and Titus, the Son of God. I mean, these are literally written on the Arch of Titus, which commemorates the raising of the temple that Jesus predicted. So you can see that you get 2/3 of the Trinity just being established there, and then the other individual is Domitian, the Holy Spirit. So he wasn't there. He was not in Judea, so he was a spirit.
But the Holy Spirit is actually a Jewish idea. It's not just a Christian
well,
idea.
Okay, but the expression, Hagia Noumena, is a Greek term. It's not. It doesn't come from the Torah.
Well, I did ask a rabbi, and he said, we do believe in the Holy Spirit, and I think the idea is that the Holy Spirit is the agent of God, sent by God to perform miracles and impregnate Mary.
Yeah,
and
the
that
Holy
stuff.
Spirit is an interpretation into English. I mean, it's actually a more like better kind of. It's like the kind of the terrible, powerful one. It's really not. Holy Spirit is just kind of anglicized concept about the term that occurs far later. The rabbi, I mean, he's certainly correct. That concept it's so generic. Holy Spirit. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything, and it can be used.
Is this also an Islamic idea? They call it ruh, which means spirit.
Yeah. Well,
But I think the idea is simply this: that God exists outside the universe, having created it. So when he wants to perform miracles, he can't logically send himself. He has to send somebody else. Because he can't enter his own universe because he's not part of it. It's that kind
Claire,
of idea.
do you have like a citation in the Gospels for this definition? Because having read it,
that's under the 13 principles of Judaism.
I know.
In that
and
God is immaterial.
And I don't mean to negate your position, but I'm just saying that it's not a very precise sort of metaphor or description of something, and it's open for interpretation. And I would just say to me the one that's more grounded just in the historical era that Jesus is describing. He's talking about the Roman Jewish War. He's talking about the encircling Jerusalem with the wall. He's talking about the raising of the temple, right? These are actual events from the war. And so in that war, these terms, would be referring to, the Flavian Caesars. It would be, God the Father, Titus is the Son of God. I mean, this cannot really be disputed very well because these are the terms carved on the
Oh, I was
Titus.
thinking of the Nicene Creed rather than what you were just referring
Yeah, well,
to.
the thing is that there's many sort of Christian literatures that occur after the fact. The Nag Hammadi material, but these are really more third and fourth century stuff. The I think the textual criticism of the Gospels should try to place it, in a particular point in time, and then just make sense out of it there. And the stuff that comes afterwards, it's many different kind of interpretations. I mean, look at the interpretations of the Gospels that occur now. Look at all the different Christian sects that have, different ideas about Jesus, or even look into New Testament scholarship. And
Well,
it's
I
just
suppose
hundreds of
I'm really thinking about the doctrine of the Trinity, over which so many heretics were burnt at the stake for when they denied the divinity of Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, it was an intellectual problem, but it's one that emerges long after the writing of the Gospels. I try to, in my textual interpretation and criticism, I'm actually trying to relate to the terms in the way that the author used them and created them. Long after the fact, hundreds of years later, these things can become any manner of, sort of understanding about Christian theology. But in Caesar's Messiah, I'm really just talking about the Gospels and the Jewish war and the relationship between, the events and the characters that you read in the Gospel and the war. So the Nicene Creed and, the different heresies that occur later on, they're really not a focus of mine.
Oh, oh. And, and are you agnostic or atheist now?
It depends on the time of day, but I would say I'm an agnostic. I don't have, and I'm one who, but I think I have my, kind of my feet in all three camps. I can actually, I think that there is, a kind of spirituality which can understand the universe as something with a design that humans can be part of, and I think this is coherent. And I also think that atheism, particularly in terms of standing against sort of the intellectual structure of the Abrahamic traditions, can be very valuable just as an intellectual platform. And of course, agnosticism seems to be, the safe bet in term not only in terms of like, well, we don't really know, so we have to be agnostic because we just don't. As I said, I just don't think that's it. To me, it's like it's literally a question like, does God exist? Is to me is like the question of was Jesus historical? I just I would like to spend time with questions that are possible to be answered, because ones that are not possible to be answered are, it's life is short, and
These are philosophical questions.
yeah, these are philosophical questions, but even those questions, some can be answered. At least you can have the sense that you can answer them when you begin to the process of trying to, come with a solution. Whereas, as I said, like, is Jesus historical? We just don't have enough data. There's not enough data to know if whether or not there was, a pacifistic pro-Roman Messiah that wandered around in third. I mean, that's you cannot, it's not falsifiable.
But
It is
it
not
was
falsifiable.
George Washington who said that we must with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion.
Well, there you go. So, yeah, that is a
And he wasn't Christian, was he?
no, he wasn't. No, certainly
He was
not.
closer to being Muslim, was he not?
Well, he's a Freemason.
Well, I suppose I would say I say that simply because if you're Gentile and you believe in the oneness of God, then you are closer to being a Muslim than you are to being Christian.
Yeah, I mean, Washington, he was sworn in wearing his apron. So I would say if you want to go into theology, I would want to place him within, kind of the known and the unknown theology of the Freemasons. And but I can see your point that he really wasn't even though he's often talked about like he's a Christian, like they do so many of the presidents, but in
And
fact
five of them weren't even Christian.
they are. No,
Adams
they're
and
not. Yeah, what they
Franklin
were.
and
Yeah,
Jefferson,
I have
Madison, and
said,
Washington.
the identity of the ruling class is one of my kind of areas of curiosity. So I would like to know more about who these people actually are, but I just don't. So,
What you mean that the founding fathers? Is that what you mean?
well, the founding fathers and all of the ruling class. I mean, I would like to know, what is there. I just see propaganda. And so because of that, I don't really trust what the ruling class says about itself.
But
I
what
just
about
don't.
the Declaration of Independence when it was implicitly when it implicitly refers to God creating all men equal?
Yeah, I mean it's a beautiful saying. Um, the question is what the level of sincerity was of the people who were writing the document, and what was their intention to use the document for. I mean, it's an open question to me. You know, who was really and the real purpose of creating the Republic of the United States. I mean,
I
you've
think that
got
the founding fathers were proto-Muslim, weren't they? Really?
well, they were Masons. I mean, it's like if you look at the signers of the Declaration, over half are known to have been Freemasons. The the Boston Tea Party is these are Freemasons. I mean, Hancock and Paul Revere, these are all Lodge brothers. So that's just very interesting to me, and because I am someone who looks at the world through the idea of propaganda, I just want to know more about them. I don't trust them just as they describe themselves. This would be like trusting Roman Caesar as they describe themselves. I think this is the divine right of kings is a good template to use, in kind of understanding, the kind of the context of our civilization. I mean, it's like, well, what are we being told that's real, and what is propaganda? It's up to the citizens to make that decision, and to go through the analysis and work to understand it.
But would you say that the American Revolution was actually a very natural reaction to the divine right of kings? Because that was
Sure, as it of course as it's been explained to us. But there are secret societies and things about the revolution which frankly are mysterious to me, and I would like to know more about those things.
I have a
I,
little
I
theory about the Masons,
yeah,
which is that it's only meant to be for the Abrahamic faith, and I think that when the time is right, the Jews and the Muslims will tell Christians that they are idolaters and blasphemers, and they should cease and desist their religion of idolatry and blasphemy for the good of the world.
well, um, produce the documents, and I think you'll find many people will be amazed. I mean, it's um, we will see going forward, won't we?
Well, yes, yes, but I suppose it does make sense simply because the Jews and the Muslims are agreed on the oneness of God, and Christians believe in this absurdity. It seems. I mean, to worship God, I mean Jesus as the co-equal of the God that created the universe is, well, it's a stretch, and obviously the only way to enforce this belief was to burn heretics at the stake, and because this practice stopped at the end of the 1600s, belief in Christianity began to fail, and now we are in the situation where the secular political ideology, liberalism, is now also failing, and I think this has consequences for Western civilization being without a functioning moral and political system, which I think could be easily replaced by an integrated moral and legal political system that is based on the Quran. It's just a
Well,
little
good luck with
idea.
that. I think that the idea that, like, even, going back into the Torah, I mean, the Ten Commandments seem more like the proclamations of oligarchs, than something that really is meaningful as far as like helping us spiritually develop. The Moses stories are preposterous. Let's face it; they're no better than the Jesus stories. And Isaiah is actually very creepy. And Deuteronomy, where you talk about the extermination of the ethnicities, this doesn't strike me as being.
The
Uh,
Amalekites.
Pardon me?
The Amalekites, the
Well,
extermination.
the seven ethnicities that are described, I mean, no one really knows who they are, but the Jebusites and things. But just the idea of destroying ethnicities, God saying, go out and kill an ethnicity, kill that ethnicity. I mean, this is not, I mean, what I would say about the Torah, and, and not to irk my Jewish friends, but my sense is that it's really just kind of more of the same of the Gospels, in the sense that it's the literature of oligarchs. It says, look, obey the king, me, who's writing this stuff, and we will conquer, and then I will become greater. And if we fail, then that's because you weren't pure enough. And so now we have to go back and we'll try again after we have a purification. And so it's inspirational for warfare, the stories of Samson and David and things, killing Goliath and whatnot. But I don't think it's useful for ethnic harmony and intellectual, spiritual development.
You don't think
I
so? But I mean,
no.
the Quran. Okay, we've got 6 theocracies still in existence in the world, and they're based on Sharia. So somehow they've managed to continue doing this sort of thing, while Christianity has already been replaced by liberalism, and
Well,
liberalism
no, I
is
mean,
now
I think,
failing in my view.
yeah, I mean, I think Christians would contest that. I mean, so, it's just, it would be nice if the theocracies would have a unified power and would, work towards something benevolent, because I think they are, as I was describing, like stories in the Torah, they're more, and I think also the stories in the Quran, they're militaristic. There's military victories which are assisted by God.
But
Um,
all religions are about law and war, aren't they? I mean,
well,
it's
they
impossible to
no, I
avoid.
don't. I mean, this may be the case. I'm not sure. Actually, I would disagree with that, because I mean, I think there are some, like, particularly Zen Buddhism is which
But
may
they
not be
achieved no
ever.
great empire.
Oh, they did, certainly.
Did they? I don't think even
But
the
uh,
Chinese
I've
credit
been
Buddhism.
to Borobudur in Java. I mean, it is bigger and more magnificent than any pyramid, and it is an extraordinary achievement, intellectual achievement, to have created something like that. It's amazing. But
Oh, I
so,
have seen that temple in Java, right? That
yeah,
Borobudur.
Borobudur, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
the thing is that Buddhism certainly did create an empire, but I mean, um, well, I mean, it ran into Islam at a certain point, and
Well, yes. I mean,
that was a
the
problem.
last 3 global empires have
Yeah.
been
So
Christian.
yeah. So and Christianity. So anyway, it's like, but I would just say that it is possible to have. I mean, would hope that it's possible to have a theology that doesn't have as part of its tradition warfare. But I just think that, if you, like, you talked about, well, are you an atheist, thing like that. I mean, I would say I am someone who sees a future for religion that is transcendent. And I mean, personally, I would like to get beyond the Abrahamic traditions. I mean, they are historically significant and they have tremendous power, and they are the basis for much of our moral content.
Mm.
Well, but they are also too they're too unfocused in their historical stories, to really be clear cut path for the kind of spiritual growth I think we're capable of. Um, and as to how we would do that, I just don't know. I'm not. at the moment trying to organize any religion. I just would think that the historical stories, of the Abrahamic traditions, weigh on us negatively as much as they are inspirational. I think we should try to find a more clear-cut path for humanity.
Well, I just don't see how we're going to, invent a religion that's just, going to be better than, the three Abrahamic faiths. We'll just
It's
be kicked around, wouldn't we, for being this
yeah, yeah.
upstart cult?
Right. Well, I mean, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. That's for sure. Yeah.
No, and I think it seems that we're only left with the option of choosing from what's available rather than creating our own religion, and
Yeah.
and I'm reminded. I mean, we were talking about philosophical questions, and I am reminded of Voltaire, who said that if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him.
Yeah. Well, so the future could be very interesting.
Yes.
Claire, I have to run. Thank you so much for this conversation. Very interesting. I hope we can do it again.
I'd love to, Joe.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
Thank you very much.
All right. We'll
All
talk
right.
soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.